Welcome, dear dreamers, to another night with Whispers of the Night, where the gentle stories of twilight and whispers of the unseen guide you into a world of calm and wonder. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so that every evening we can meet here again, where dreams and stories entwine. Tonight, we enter a quiet library where only a single lamp glows, and a reader named Aven is lost in a story too beautiful to end. The rain has stopped, yet the streets shimmer under the soft glow of distant lamps. In the stillness of night, she discovers that the dawn has not yet come. Let us sit together, breathe softly, and step into the pages of her story, where time lingers and the world feels infinitely calm. Now, dear dreamers, settle deeper into your pillow and let your mind follow Aven into the quiet of the library. Hear the gentle hum of the world outside, the soft puddles reflecting lamplight, the distant echoes of a night that refuses to end. Feel the calm pulse of your breath syncing with the rhythm of her turning pages. The library is vast and still, yet filled with the heartbeat of stories that have lived for centuries. Each shelf holds the memory of hands long gone, and the books hum softly, welcoming you. Walk slowly through the aisles with Aven. Let your fingers brush over the smooth spines. Smell the faint sweetness of old paper. Feel the soft weight of the lamp's amber glow warming your skin. There is no rush, no need to turn your eyes to the window or to the sky. Here, in this suspended moment, the night itself stretches to embrace you. You are safe. You are calm. You are present in this quiet world where the dawn may never come, yet the heart of the night glows eternal. Let your thoughts drift along the pages, floating like dust motes in lamplight. Let your mind rest. Let it wander. Let it dream. And with every breath, feel the gentle hush of night settling deep inside, a soft, tender lullaby that carries you toward your own serene awakening. The reader who never woke the dawn. The library after midnight. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets still shimmered with the memory of it. Thin puddles glistened on the cobblestones like pieces of broken glass, catching the soft yellow spill of the gas lamps that lined the quiet avenue. Water dripped rhythmically from the black iron gutters, ticking like a metronome, slow and steady. The scent of wet earth lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of leaves just turning for autumn. It was the kind of night that felt like it had fallen asleep with its eyes open, silent, heavy. Waiting in the heart of town stood the library, a grand, time-worn building of sandstone and ivy, its tall windows like hollow eyes gazing out into the wet dark. Most of the town's buildings had shuttered long before midnight, but the library remained alive in its own quiet way. Behind the main doors, Inside the great reading hall, one light still burned. It came from a single lamp perched on a polished oak table in the far back corner of the hall, beneath the stained glass skylight. The light was soft, golden, and solitary, casting a warm halo on the table's surface and across the open pages of a thick, leather-bound book. Seated at the table, curled into a posture of quiet rapture, was Aven. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her on the deep-cushioned chair, elbows propped on the table, chin resting on one palm, the other hand slowly turning pages. Her coat, damp from the earlier rain, lay forgotten over the back of the chair, and her scarf trailed down like ivy. Around her, a small kingdom of books had grown, a stack of unread tomes on her left, a pile of finished ones on her right. Time had long since disappeared between them. The library was vast and hushed, ceiling beams arched like the ribs of a cathedral, cradling silence above them. High shelves rose in every direction, holding more stories than could ever be read in a lifetime. Occasionally, the silence would be interrupted by the quiet creak of settling wood, or the whisper of a page turning, but mostly, the night just breathed, slow, patient, and unchanging. Aven had been reading for hours, though she had long stopped checking the time. The book before her, a forgotten classic by an author she had never heard of, had seized her heart from the first sentence. It was a story about a girl who could speak the names of stars, about a kingdom that existed only in reflection, about doors that could not be opened unless you'd forgotten your name. It was a story that hummed with mystery and longing, the kind of tale that felt both impossibly distant and intimately true. She didn't notice the time until the old grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed 3. The sound echoed through the library like a slow tolling bell. 1, 2, 3. Aven blinked. Her eyes, dry from reading too long, slowly lifted to the skylight above. Rain droplets still clung to the stained glass, refracting the lamplight in fractured colors. Beyond the glass, the sky was still black, not the bruised navy of early morning, but a deep, velvety black, untouched by light. No pink threaded the horizon. No stars had faded. There was no sign of dawn. She frowned slightly, more puzzled than concerned. Had she lost track of the days? Was it possible the clock had stopped? She glanced back down at her book, then over her shoulder toward the rest of the library. The silence had deepened, not changed exactly, but become more noticeable, like a held breath. There was no ticking of the wall clocks, no creak of the beams, only the steady hum of her lamp and the fading echo of the chime rising from her chair. Aven stretched, her limbs reluctant after hours of stillness. She walked quietly across the wide floor, the soles of her boots making soft sounds against the ancient wood. She passed through rows of shelves and reading nooks, down the central aisle to the tall front windows. Pushing aside a heavy velvet curtain, she peered out. The street outside was empty. The world looked paused. The rain-slick cobblestones glistened under the lamps, but there were no shadows moving, no sign of wind, no distant sounds, not even the usual bark of the night dog 2 blocks away. It was as if time had stilled. A sudden chill ran through her, not from fear, but from something older, a sense of wrongness, the kind that hums in your bones rather than your ears. She turned back toward the interior of the library, letting the curtain fall back into place. Perhaps the clock was wrong. Perhaps she had read too long and confused herself. But even as she thought it, she knew something had shifted back at her table. The book still lay open, the page lit golden under the lamp. But something about it had changed, subtly. The words on the page no longer seemed as familiar. She could still read them, but they didn't carry the same warmth they had moments ago. It was like looking at a loved one and suddenly forgetting their middle name. She reached out and touched the page, her fingers running along the edge. The paper felt cooler than before, and then a sound, small, distant, not from outside. From within the library, Aven turned sharply. It was not a creak or a click. It was a footstep, soft, measured. She hesitated, listening. Another step, and another. But when she looked down the main aisle, it was empty. No one. Her mind offered her sensible explanations. Perhaps a night janitor. Perhaps someone else lost in a book, unaware of the hour. She had done the same, but some instinct told her this was different. There had never been footsteps in the library after midnight, not unless they belonged to her own. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb the silence more than she must. Her boots barely touched the floor. She passed under the arch into the history section, where the footsteps had seemed to echo. Rows of books stood undisturbed, their spines aged and dust-scented. No motion, no presence, and then she saw it. A book lying open on the floor. Not one she had read, not from her table. It was old, its binding cracked, pages yellowed. It looked like it had been there a long time, but Aven knew this section well. She had walked this row earlier tonight. It hadn't been there then. She crouched, slowly, examining it. The text was handwritten, not printed in slanting ink that shimmered faintly under the ambient light. She couldn't read the words. They shifted and bent, curling like smoke, but she could feel them. Each letter pulsed with a kind of soundless music, like the ringing of a struck glass. Aven reached out as her fingertips brushed the page. Something changed. The library shifted. It was almost imperceptible at first. A drop in temperature, a flicker in the lamp behind her. Then came the feeling of being watched. Not maliciously, not quite, but undeniably. She stood quickly, heart thudding, the sound loud in the cavernous quiet. The library had changed again. The shadows had lengthened. The golden glow of her lamp felt distant, almost like a memory. She could no longer hear the rainwater dripping outside, or the groan of the ancient beams. Instead, there was another sound, soft, rhythmic breathing. Not hers. Aven turned around. At the far end of the row stood a figure, tall, indistinct, cloaked in something that shimmered like smoke and shadow. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but its posture was calm. It was watching her, not approaching, not threatening, just present. She couldn't move. Not from fear, exactly, but from the gravity of the moment. As if stepping forward would break some invisible seal, the figure lifted a hand slowly and pointed toward the book on the floor. Aven looked down. The book was glowing now, faintly, as though lit from within. The words had stilled, becoming legible. To open the dawn, one must first close the night. She looked back up. The figure was gone. Silence again. Aven remained still for a long moment. The words burned in her mind. To open the dawn. What did it mean? She returned to her table, carrying the strange book with her, her heart beating with something between fear and wonder. The world outside remained untouched by morning. The black sky refused to pale. Somewhere beyond the known hours, the rules of time had faltered, and only she had noticed. Aven sat down and opened the book to the beginning. Her lamp still glowed, the ink shimmered. The library watched, and she began to read. Somewhere in the world, the sun waited, but it would not rise, not until she found the end of the story. The book with no beginning. Aven had not remembered leaving the window open, and yet the curtains stirred, a slow, soundless motion that made her look up from the scattered pages on her desk. She had been working for hours, or perhaps not at all. She could not tell any more where the minutes went when she read at night. The candle beside her had nearly melted down to its stub, the flame trembling like something afraid to exist. It was then that she noticed the book. It lay near the edge of the table, half hidden beneath her notes, as though it had been there all along, waiting for her to notice. The cover was pale blue, the kind of color that might have belonged to a forgotten morning sky. It had no title, no author's name, no marking of any kind. But the strangest thing, what made her hesitate before touching it, was the warmth. It was faint, like the echo of someone's hand, as if the book had only just been set down by an invisible reader. She brushed the edge of it with her fingers. The warmth deepened, pulsing once, the way a heart might answer a touch. Aven glanced toward the door. It was closed, as she'd left it. No one could have entered the room. She listened. The house was still. Beyond the window, the wind breathed faintly, carrying the hollow hum of the city's sleeping hours. Everything was normal, except for this book that seemed to breathe against her palm. She pulled it closer. The blue cover caught the candlelight and shimmered faintly. Not like fabric or paper, but something between the two, a texture she couldn't name. When she opened it, the first page was blank, perfectly white, not aged or frayed. She turned it, expecting at least a publisher's mark, a copyright, a date something, nothing. Every page she flipped was empty, until she came back again to the very first. That was when the words began to appear. They surfaced slowly, as though rising from beneath the paper's skin. A soft, golden line, curling, steady, then shaping itself into letters. For the one who reads between worlds, her throat tightened. She leaned closer. The handwriting, if it could be called, that looked alive. The letters glowed faintly, each stroke trailing a dust of light that vanished as she watched. She whispered the line aloud, not knowing why. For the one who reads between worlds, the sound of her own voice felt foreign in the room, too small. The lights flickered, the candle flared once, then steadied again, but the air had changed. It was denser somehow, as if the walls had drawn farther away and the corners of the room had deepened into something else entirely. She set the book down. Her pulse was fast, her palms damp. She tried to laugh, to say it was only exhaustion, that she had been awake too long and her eyes were playing tricks. But the warmth of the book was still there, and when she looked again, the single line of gold had faded and been replaced by something new. Do not look away, she did instinctively. But the instant her gaze broke from the page, the candle sputtered out. The room fell into a heavy dark. She froze. For a few seconds, she heard only the faint hiss of the cooling wick, the sound of her own heartbeat. Then a faint radiance began to bloom from the open book itself. It was not bright, not enough to light the room, but enough for her to see the edges of the desk, her own hands pale against the wood. The page gleamed softly, words still forming, one by one. If you are reading this, the line has already been crossed. Aven's lips parted, though no sound came out. Crossed what line? She touched the page, and for a moment the paper seemed to ripple beneath her fingertip like water. Her breath caught. She pulled back, but not fast enough. The golden ink pulsed once, and her finger came away shining faintly. She stared. The light lingered for a few seconds before seeping into her skin. It didn't hurt. It simply vanished, absorbed, leaving her trembling. She stood up, pushing her chair back too quickly. It scraped across the floor with a sharp, echoing sound. The air in the room seemed to swallow it. The window's curtains no longer stirred. Even the wind outside had gone still. She wanted to close the book. She reached for it again, but as her hand touched the cover, it felt heavier than before, as if something inside resisted her. The pages fluttered of their own accord, rustling softly, faster and faster, until they stopped at a page deep within. This one was not blank. It showed an illustration drawn in the same luminous ink. A desk, her desk beneath a window, a candle beside a book of pale blue. The drawing trembled faintly, and for a moment she could have sworn the candle flame in the picture moved. She stepped back, heart hammering. The image shifted, the golden lines rearranging themselves, forming new strokes. Now there was a figure sitting at the desk, a girl with her head bent over the book. Aven's breath faltered. The girl looked like her. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not." But the ink moved again, spelling a new line below the drawing. "You are late." The candle on her desk flared back to life with a sound like a breath drawn sharply. The sudden light made her blink. When her eyes cleared, the room looked the same again. The book lay open, but the illustration was gone. Only blank paper remained. Aven stood for a long time without moving. She tried to remember everything she had read before noticing the book. Her own notes were scattered on the desk, covered in half-finished sentences. Research lines from her thesis on dream narratives and cognitive fiction, a subject she'd once loved, but now only endured. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was tired, yes. Maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe she was sleep-deprived enough to see words where there were none. Yet she could still feel the faint heat where the ink had touched her. She should go to bed. She told herself this twice, firmly, but she didn't move. The book still lay open, quiet, harmless. The candle flame trembled like an eyelid fighting sleep. She sat back down slowly. "All right," she murmured. "Between worlds, is it? Let's see where you begin." The page before her stayed blank. She turned one, then another, still blank. She turned another and suddenly the paper beneath her fingers felt different, softer, almost pliant. A faint scent reached her, not of paper or wax, but of rain. She paused, frowning. She looked up. The window was no longer there, where the wall should have been. There was a dim horizon, wide and deep, like dawn caught beneath the sea. The light from the candle didn't touch it. It only made a halo around her desk, and beyond that darkness, threaded with faint glimmers, as if stars were drifting underwater. Aven gripped the edges of the desk, her breath shallow. This couldn't be real. The book lay open, its pages stirring gently in a wind that didn't exist a moment ago. She stood, too fast again, and the chair tipped backward, falling soundlessly into that vast dimness behind her. It didn't hit the floor, it just vanished. Her throat tightened. She reached for the book as if to close it, but now she could see that the golden script had returned, brighter this time, covering the page from edge to edge. "You have opened what was never closed," it read. "You have turned where no page should turn. Do not forget your name." She whispered it aloud, just to hear it. Aven. The sound drifted away to Isily. She said it again, louder. Aven. It felt thinner this time, a word unchored. The golden letters began to move, rearranging themselves into a single sentence that shimmered as though written with sunlight, then read. She didn't mean to obey, but her eyes followed as the next words appeared. They described a house with a narrow stair, a window facing east, and a girl who stayed awake long after the night had finished itself. The description was exact: her own home, her own desk, her own sleepless hours. Every detail was written before her eyes, as if the book were reading her instead. And then, with a terrible slowness, the ink began to describe what she was doing now. She leaned closer, her breath trembling against the page. She tried to stop reading, but the words drew her on. Aven gasped and snapped the book shut. The light vanished instantly, leaving her in the dark. She stood, shaking, clutching the closed volume to her chest. Silence pressed around her like a second skin. After a long moment, she groped for the matchbox and relit the candle. The small flame bloomed, steady, harmless. The window was back. Her chair was upright. The room was her room again. She let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half disbelief. She set the book aside. It looked ordinary now, faintly warm still, but quiet. Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe this was what too many nights without sleep could do. She told herself she would throw it away in the morning. But that night, when she finally lay down, she couldn't sleep. The glow of the candle burned behind her eyes long after it was out. Every time she almost drifted off, she heard the whisper of turning pages, softer than breath, but close. She turned on the light twice, checked the table. The book hadn't moved. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her, waiting. Near dawn, exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of a place without ceilings, where books floated like lanterns above dark water. One of them, pale blue, drifted toward her. She tried to turn away, but her reflection in the water caught her by the wrist and smiled. "You read between," it whispered. "Now you belong between." She woke with the taste of that voice in her mouth. The sun was barely up. The book was gone. Her desk was bare, except for the half-melted candle and a faint golden smear across the wood, as though someone had written there and wiped it away. She searched the floor, the shelves, under the bed. Nothing, no sign of it. When she looked in the mirror before leaving her room, she froze. There, just beneath her collarbone, was a thin, glimmering mark, the faint outline of letters, too blurred to read. She touched it, and for an instant it was warm, as though the ink had never dried. She dressed in silence, packed her notes, and went to class as if nothing had changed. The world outside was ordinary: buses, voices, footsteps, sunlight. But when she glanced at her notebook during lecture, she saw a faint shimmer along the edge of one page, the same hue of gold. She blinked. It was gone. That night, she told herself she wouldn't read. She turned off the lights early. But as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed once, a notification she didn't recognize. The screen showed a single message: sender unknown. For the one who reads between worlds. Her pulse quickened. She deleted it immediately. The room felt smaller. Outside, the dawn had not yet broken, but the sky was already paling at the edges. A color she had never seen before: soft blue, faintly luminous, like the cover of a book she could no longer find. Somewhere, she thought she heard a page turning. And this time, she didn't open her eyes. The words that remember her. The first night she noticed it, Aven told herself it was nothing more than coincidence, a trick of the mind, perhaps, or the subtle self-projection that came from reading too much. She had always believed that the stories we loved most had a way of borrowing our reflection, that we read ourselves, unknowingly, between the lines. But this was different. This was exact. It began with small things, a single line that mirrored her own thoughts, a description of a girl sitting at a table in a rain-washed city, surrounded by towers of unread books. The first time she saw it, she smiled in disbelief. It was too familiar, yes, but it could have been anyone. Coincidence could explain it. But by the third night, there was no coincidence left to hide behind. Each evening, the book waited for her, always on the same spot of the table, faintly warm, faintly humming. Its cover no longer looked as it had when she first found it. The blue had deepened, as though it had absorbed the twilight. Sometimes she thought she saw faint lines rippling beneath the surface, like veins of gold trapped beneath glass. The title remained absent, and the first page still began the same way, for the one who reads between worlds. But beyond that, the pages never stayed the same. Every night, new words appeared, words that hadn't existed before, written in that same slow-blooming gold. Now, the book spoke of her. It described the way she moved through her apartment at dusk, the sound of her kettle whistling, the way her breath fogged the window as she looked down at the empty street. It told of her hesitation before she opened it, the precise order in which she placed her fingers on the cover, the slight tremor in her left hand. It told her what she thought before she thought it. The voice on the page was not cruel, not mocking. It was calm, almost tender, as though it were writing her with care. Still, it unsettled her. She tried to stop reading after the first few pages, but the book resisted being closed, not physically, but in the way a gaze resists being turned away. The words held her there. Each line deepened her silence. She could feel herself sinking, as though the act of reading was not something she did, but something that was being done to her. By the fourth night, she noticed something else. When she left the book open and turned away, she could hear a faint scratching sound, like a quill moving across paper. Once, she turned too quickly and caught sight of the words rearranging themselves, the golden lines melting and reforming into new sentences. She felt her breath stop. The book froze, as if caught in the act. When she blinked, the text was still again. It had written a new line. "You should not watch me, right?" She closed it then, harder than she meant to, her hands trembling. But when she set it aside and tried to sleep, the air of the room seemed to alive. Every shadow had a pulse. Every silence held a whisper she almost understood. She dreamed of the library that night, though she hadn't thought of it in days. The dream was so vivid, she woke certain she could still smell the parchment dust and the cold iron of the railings. In the dream, she had walked the same aisles as before, but the shelves had changed. The books were humming softly, as though they knew her name. At the end of the aisle, the pale blue book waited under the golden skylight, and the figure from that other night stood behind it, tall, still, faceless. When she tried to speak, the figure raised a hand and whispered, not aloud but directly into her thoughts, "You've brought it home." She woke before dawn, her sheets tangled, her throat dry. The air was cold. The book lay open on her table again, though she was sure she had closed it before she slept. The page was half filled with fresh writing. "Dreams remember what the waking mind forgets," it said. "You are not lost, Aven. You are being found." She whispered the words aloud, without meaning to, then pressed her hand to her mouth. The sound of her voice felt strange, as though it had been borrowed from somewhere else. The letters on the page shimmered faintly, as if pleased to be heard. That was the moment she realized it knew her name, not because she'd written it or said it near the book before, but because it remembered. The next day passed in a fog. She went to work at the small university library, though she recalled little of what she did. Her co-workers greeted her, but their voices sounded distant, filtered through static. Every face seemed slightly blurred at the edges, as though the world was an unfinished painting. When she looked at the clock, the hands didn't move. Time felt suspended, like the pause between inhale and exhale. Yet somehow, the day ended. Dusk came, and when she returned home, the book was waiting, already open this time. The first line made her stop breathing. The one who never woke the dawn, her own phrase, one she had never said aloud, only written once, years ago, in a notebook she had since lost. It had been the title of a story she'd begun as a child, a fragment of a dream she couldn't recall. No one could have known it. Yet the book did. The rest of the page was blank for a long time. She sat motionless, her heart thudding softly in the stillness. Then, slowly, the words began to appear. The night does not fear her. The dawn waits for her name. She will read until the horizon remembers. She touched the page. It was warm, pulsing faintly. For the first time, she felt that the warmth came not from the book, but from something beneath it, as though the table itself had begun to breathe. The days that followed blurred together. She slept less, ate little. Every evening she found herself drawn to the same chair, the same lamp, the same endless unfolding of golden words. The book no longer waited to be opened. Sometimes it was already open when she entered the room. Sometimes she found it in places she hadn't left it, the windowsill, the counter, once even beside her pillow. Wherever she went, it seemed to follow. The more she read, the more it remembered. It wrote about her past moments she had long forgotten. It recalled the way her mother had braided her hair before school, the first book she ever stole from the library when she was 7, the letter she wrote but never sent. It knew the shape of her dreams and the color of her fears. It remembered the smell of the rain on the night she turned 18, when she had stood alone on the bridge and wished for the world to pause just once, long enough for her to catch her breath. And it remembered things she didn't, details that should have been hers but weren't. A childhood friend with eyes the color of smoke, a candlelit stairwell where she had never been, a song she supposedly sang as a child that no one else knew. The book wrote these as facts. She began to wonder if they had once been real, if the book was restoring memories rather than inventing them. The thought both comforted and terrified her. On the 7th night, she noticed the first change in her reflection. The mirror above her desk showed her face a shade paler, her eyes slightly brighter, almost reflective. When she leaned closer, she thought she saw faint golden dust clinging to her lashes. She blinked. It was gone. But the book's pages gleamed brighter than ever, as if feeding on her attention. When she looked away, she felt it, watching. The text that night began differently, no longer in third person. It spoke directly. You are reading me, but I am remembering you. You have carried me longer than you know. The library was only a door you left open. Aven froze. The words pulsed once, as if waiting for acknowledgement. She whispered, "Who are you?" And the page rippled beneath her hand, as though stirred by wind. Slowly, new lines formed. Not who, when. She stared, unsure whether she was afraid or awed. The next lines appeared faster, the ink bright. You found me before. You read me when the dawn forgot to rise. You left, but I did not. Now I am here to remember what you left behind. Aven closed the book, then, hands trembling. But even with it shut, she could see the faint glow seeping through the edges of the cover, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The air in the room grew warmer, heavier. She felt dizzy, her thoughts dissolving into half-formed fragments. When she finally turned off the lamp, the glow from the book filled the dark that night. Her dream was clearer than waking life. She walked through the library again, only this time it was filled with mirrors instead of books. Each mirror reflected a version of herself, one reading, one sleeping, one standing by a window, watching a world that no longer moved. At the center of the hall, beneath the skylight, stood a mirror shaped like an open book. She approached it, heart racing, and saw her reflection turn a page. The reflection looked up and smiled with her mouth, her voice whispering from the glass, to open the dawn. One must first close the night. She woke, gasping. Her room was filled with faint golden light, though the curtains were drawn. The book lay open on her chest, heavy, warm. The page bore new words. You left the night open. Now we must close it together. Something inside her shifted. Then, not panic, not surrender, but recognition. Aven understood dimly that she had crossed a boundary long ago, and that this book was not her captor, but her companion across it. Perhaps she had found it before. Perhaps she had written it once and forgotten. The more she thought, the more the memory seemed to blur into the present, until she could no longer tell whether she was remembering or reading. She rose before dawn and went to the window. The world outside was still dark, the same unmoving black that had lingered since that night in the library. But far off, at the horizon, she thought she saw a faint shimmer, not the light of morning, but something softer, like the promise of it. She pressed her hand to the glass. It was cold. Behind her, the book turned a page on its own, the sound crisp and delicate. A new line appeared. "When you remember, the light will return." She turned slowly. "Remember what?" she whispered. The ink glowed. "The first word you ever wrote in me." She frowned, trying to recall. But the memory danced just out of reach. She had written so many words in so many notebooks, so many half-stories and fragments. How could she know which belonged to this? Yet a feeling stirred in her, a warmth deep in her chest, the echo of a childhood dream she couldn't name, the same dream that had inspired her to write that long-lost title, The Reader Who Never Woke the Dawn. She looked down at the book. The page shimmered, and beneath the existing text, faint golden lines began to form, handwriting that matched her own. Slowly, the letters surfaced, one by one, until she could read them. Once there was a girl who read the dark until it forgot to end. Her throat tightened. She remembered writing those words years ago in a small notebook on a sleepless night, convinced she had dreamed them. She hadn't known what they meant then. She wasn't sure she did now. But the book remembered. It had waited. The glow deepened, filling the room with a pale, dawn-colored light. Aven felt it wash over her, warm and weightless. The words on the page flickered like a heartbeat. She reached out, tracing the first sentence she had ever written, feeling the pulse beneath her fingers. The warmth spread through her hand, up her arm, into her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she closed her eyes, and the darkness behind them was no longer empty. It was filled with quiet, luminous words, all whispering the same thing. "Remember, and the dawn will wake." The book sighed softly, and the light grew. The Night Without Time. The days passed, or at least Aven thought they did. She marked them at first, tiny notches on a scrap of paper torn from her notebook. But after the fifth mark, she stopped. It had become impossible to tell whether the world beyond the windows was changing. Every evening when she returned to the library, the same darkness pressed softly against the glass, and the same pale gaslight burned beyond the street. No morning ever came. The clocks still ticked, but their rhythm had grown wrong, as though the seconds stumbled and forgot where they were going. It was always night now. The library had changed with it. The air, once merely still, now seemed thick, almost tangible, as if made of quiet that could be touched. Shadows stretched farther than they should, curling under shelves and around pillars like liquid smoke. Some corridors seemed longer, some shorter. Aven could no longer walk the same route twice without finding an extra turn, a staircase that hadn't been there before, or a wall where a door had been yesterday. But it didn't frighten her, not exactly. It felt more like the library was breathing around her, expanding and contracting as though it were alive. Each night, she found herself drawn back to the same table beneath the stained glass skylight. The lamp was always waiting for her, already lit, its golden glow soft and steady. The book with no title lay there too, pale blue, faintly warm. No matter where she left it, it always found its way back to that spot. as if that was where it belonged. And each night, there were new words waiting. They appeared slowly, curling onto the page in that same soft golden ink, as though written by an invisible hand that moved just ahead of her eyes. The sentences began simply, describing her steps through the library, the sound of her boots against the wooden floor, the rhythm of her breath. Then they grew stranger. The book began to write her thoughts, the hesitation before she turned a page, the quiet ache in her chest when she realized the world outside might never see dawn again, the warmth she felt inexplicably when she touched the edges of the glowing words. She told herself she was imagining it, that she was only tired, that her mind, steeped in too many stories, was inventing a new one. But the words were too precise, too gentle, too knowing. They wrote her not as she thought of herself, but as though someone older were remembering her, someone who had watched her all her life and understood the weight behind her silences. Sometimes she caught herself whispering back to the book, asking it questions, pleading softly, "Why are you writing me? What do you want me to see?" But it never answered in direct words. It only offered more sentences, as if guiding her through something she didn't yet understand. The reader who lingers between worlds must learn what she left behind. Every dawn begins as someone's. Forgetting, she copied those lines into her notebook. Though she didn't know why, they felt important, not quite prophecy, not quite warning. On the seventh night, she noticed the whispers. At first, they were just faint movements of air, the kind of sounds that old buildings make. But the longer she stayed, the clearer they became, soft murmurs that seemed to come from the shelves themselves. She could not make out words, only tone, a gentle hum of conversation, as if the books were speaking to one another in sighs and turning pages once. When she passed the poetry section, she thought she heard her own name spoken, not aloud but beneath the breath of the place. She stopped. The whisper ended. Only the golden light trembled. That was the night she found the mirror. It was narrow and tall, hidden between two bookcases she was sure hadn't existed before. The frame was black, carved with vines that twisted into shapes that might have been letters. Dust lay thick across the surface, but when she wiped it clean, the glass shone like water. She expected to see her own reflection, tired, curious, maybe a little afraid, and she did. But behind her reflection was something wrong in the mirror. The library was brighter, not lit by her single lamp, but by a light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The shadows were softer, and her reflection was reading Aven froze. The mirrored version of herself sat at the same table, holding the same blue book open in her hands. But that Aven didn't look up. Her lips moved slightly, whispering words the real Aven couldn't hear. The pages turned on their own, one by one, as if the story inside was moving faster than she could follow. Aven took a step back, her heart tight in her chest. The reflection didn't move. She glanced behind her. The real table was empty, the book closed. Then she looked back at the mirror. The other Aven still read. Slowly, she raised her hand toward the glass. Her reflection raised its hand too, but a heartbeat late, as if it were thinking before it copied her. When her fingertips met the surface, the glass felt warm, alive, and then, very faintly, she felt pressure from the other side, her reflection touching back. She gasped and stepped away. The reflection didn't. The mirrored Aven kept her hand against the glass, her mouth still moving in silent words. The shelves around her seemed to shift, sighing like a deep exhale. The whispering grew louder. To open the dawn, one must first close the night. The sentence rose inside her mind, not from memory, but as though the library itself had spoken it. The same words from the book she'd found on the floor that first night. Aven turned back toward the table. The blue book had opened itself again, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. The ink shimmered. New words formed across the paper, appearing one letter at a time. The reflection remembers what the reader forgets. She looked back at the mirror. The other Aven had stopped reading. Slowly, the mirrored version lifted her eyes. Their gazes met. For a moment, Aven felt dizzy, as if something had split inside her. Her reflection's eyes were not quite the same shade anymore. They gleamed faintly gold, like the ink of the book. She stumbled backward, and the mirror rippled, its image bending like water struck by a stone. Her reflection blurred, then steadied again. But the expression on the other face was no longer hers. It was calmer, sadder, almost pitying. Aven's voice trembled. "Who are you?" The reflection's lips moved in silence. Then, impossibly sound reached her, faint and echoing, like a voice from a dream. "I am the part that stayed." The glass darkened, and the image faded. When Aven reached out again, it was only a mirror, cold and ordinary. Her own wide-eyed reflection stared back. She stood there for a long time, breathing hard until the golden light of the lamp dimmed. Somewhere deep in the library, a clock chimed, but she couldn't tell what hour it meant. That night, she did not read further. She closed the blue book and left it on the table. But when she tried to walk to the exit, the corridors no longer obeyed her memory. The main doors were gone. Every hallway curved back toward the reading hall. Every staircase led down, but never up. By the time she returned to the table, she was shaking. The book was still there, but now a second one sat beside it, identical in shape, but silver instead of blue. Its cover shimmered faintly, and across its front, a title had appeared. The Night Without Time. Her breath caught. The title of her own chapter. She opened it slowly. The first page was blank. Then, as before, golden letters began to form. There are two readers now. One to remember, one to wake. The dawn waits for neither. The air seemed to pulse around her. The lamp flickered, and for an instant the shadows deepened so sharply that the entire library vanished into blackness. When the light returned, the mirror between the shelves was gone. Only the faint smell of rain lingered, though it hadn't rained in weeks. Aven sank into her chair, her hands trembling. She didn't know what the words meant, only that they were meant for her. The silver book glowed faintly beneath her fingers, as though it had been waiting for her to open it since the beginning of time. Somewhere far above, the stained glass skylight creaked. She looked up. Beyond the glass, the sky was no longer black. It had become a deep violet, not dawn, but something close, a shade that suggested the world was trying to remember what morning looked like. She closed her eyes. If there truly were two readers, one trapped in reflection, one trapped in story, then perhaps the only way forward was through the words themselves. Perhaps she had to keep reading, even if it meant forgetting who she was. The whispering of the shelves softened, almost tender now, as if encouraging her. The lamp burned steady once more. Aven opened the blue book first. The words shimmered into new shapes. The one who reads between worlds must finish what was begun before the first dawn. Then she opened the silver book beside it. Its pages were blank, except for the faint outline of her own handprint, pressed into the first sheet of paper, glowing softly gold. She placed her real hand over the mark. The paper felt warm, somewhere far off. A faint wind began to rise, the first breath of something long held still. Aven looked toward the windows. The darkness beyond them trembled, not with light, not yet, but with the promise of it. And then the words in the silver book began to write themselves again, line by slow line. When the reader remembers her reflection, the dawn will find its way home. Aven smiled faintly, though tears had begun to sting her eyes. She didn't know what waited beyond the story, or if there truly was a morning left to waken to. But she understood one thing: the books were not just telling her a story, they were teaching her how to find her way back. So she leaned forward, turned the page, and began to read. The night, for the first time, seemed to listen. The last page she cannot read. The library had grown quieter than ever. Even the whispering of the shelves had faded, leaving behind a silence so complete that Aven could almost hear the pulse of her own thoughts. The air seemed heavier, pressed down by the weight of all the stories surrounding her. Every corner glowed faintly, as if the light itself were holding its breath. She sat once more at the same table beneath the stained glass skylight. The lamp burned with a tired, steady gold. Before her lay the two books, the pale blue one and the silver one, their covers almost touching. It had become a familiar ritual now. She would read from one until it led her to the other, tracing the same invisible thread that wove them both together. But tonight felt different. The air around her trembled softly, as if the library itself knew this was the end of something. She could sense it to the thin, aching pull of a story reaching its edge. When she opened the blue book, its pages glowed brighter than ever before. The words moved more slowly now, each line appearing as though carved by light. Every story must remember how it began, even if the reader forgets. The reflection sleeps now, waiting for the one who crossed between pages. She traced the words with her fingertip, and the golden ink shimmered against her skin, leaving behind a faint warmth. She didn't understand everything the book said, but she felt it deep inside. Beneath thought and memory, the silver book waited beside her, unopened. She could feel its presence, like another heartbeat, outside the tall windows. The night remained, but it had changed again. The black had softened into a deep indigo that almost suggested dawn, yet no light touched the streets below. The world seemed paused at the edge of remembering what morning meant. Aven turned another page. The golden ink was fading as she read it, as though the story were dissolving in front of her. Then she came to the last page. It was blank. For a moment, she thought it was only waiting for her to read, that perhaps the words would appear as before, slow and shimmering. She waited. The The silence deepened. Nothing came. She brushed her hand across the page. It was warm, but not empty. Beneath the blankness, faint shapes pulsed like hidden writing, blurred and unreachable, as though the ink existed on another layer of the world. The words were there. She could feel them, humming softly under the surface, but her eyes couldn't see them. Aven leaned closer, squinting in the lamplight. Her breath fogged the paper slightly, and for an instant she saw a flicker, a trace of letters, half-formed and trembling. But before she could make sense of them, they vanished again, fading back into nothing. She sat back, her chest tightening with quiet frustration. Every story she had ever loved had taught her that endings mattered, that even the smallest tale deserved its last line. But this one refused to let her finish it. She whispered, "Please." The page remained still. Her voice was small, lost among the high arches of the library. "Why won't you let me read it?" For a long time, there was only the sound of her breathing and the faint hum of the lamp. Then, just as she began to think she had imagined everything, that maybe the magic had faded, she heard it, a voice, soft, quiet, coming not from the air, but from the page itself. It was the same voice she had felt between the lines in every chapter, older, gentler, full of a kind of patient knowing, because some stories can only be finished by those who dream. Aven froze. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It was the kind of sound that seemed to form inside her own mind. A thought, not her own dream, she whispered. The page pulsed faintly, as though acknowledging her. To read what cannot be written, one must cross where words dissolve. She stared down at the book, the golden ink faintly glowing beneath her fingertips. Her hands were trembling. "And if I can't come back?" There was a pause, not empty, but thoughtful. Then the voice said, softer still, "Every dawn is a return." The words settled inside her like a promise, though she didn't understand it. Not yet. Aven looked around the library. The shelves stretched endlessly into the dark, but they no longer felt vast, only distant, receding, as though the world itself were slowly folding inward. Dust motes drifted through the lamplight like sleeping stars. She thought of the reflection she had seen in the mirror, the other version of herself, still reading. Maybe that was what the voice meant. Maybe the dream was not asleep, but a crossing. Maybe the end of the story wasn't meant to be read in waking light. Her gaze fell back to the book. The blank page shimmered faintly, waiting. She drew a deep breath, then reached out. Her fingers touched the paper once more. But this time, she didn't just touch. She laid her whole palm across it, pressing gently, as though to feel the heartbeat beneath. The warmth deepened. It spread up through her hand, into her wrist, her arm. The sensation was not burning or cold. It was like falling into sunlight, soft and endless. The edges of the page glowed, and the golden light began to seep through her skin, winding in thin, luminous veins. Her eyelids grew heavy. The world around her softened, its outlines fading. The shelves blurred into lines of shadow and gold. "A dream," she whispered, half smiling, half afraid. The voice came again, fainter now. "Do not be afraid. The story knows the way." The lamp beside her flickered once, twice, then steadied into a warm, deep glow. The air shimmered. She thought she could hear the faint sound of pages turning somewhere far away, not by her hand, but by unseen ones, gentle and steady. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the blue and silver covers glowing together, their light weaving into one soft radiance that filled the table like the first breath of morning. Then the words began to appear, not on the page, but behind her eyelids, glowing letters written in light and memory. The reader sleeps, and the story dreams of her. Between silence and dawn, they become the same. She didn't know whether she was still in the library or somewhere beyond it. Her body felt weightless, her thoughts unraveling like ribbons in water. Somewhere, she thought she felt the touch of rain. Somewhere, she thought she heard her reflection turning another page. Her last waking thought was not fear or confusion, but peace, the soft, steady kind that comes when the heart finally recognizes its place in the story. Aven smiled faintly and whispered into the glow, "Then let the dream finish what I cannot." And the world exhaled. The lamplight dimmed. The golden shimmer sank into darkness outside. The sky shuddered, a subtle tremor, almost imperceptible, and the faintest thread of color appeared along the horizon, so pale it could have been imagined. Not dawn yet, but the memory of it. In the silence that followed, the book on the table remained open to its final, unread page. The golden ink still pulsed faintly beneath the surface, like a sleeping heartbeat, and Aven's hand rested gently across it. Her face turned toward the hint of light she could not see. The clock in the entrance hall gave a single chime, low, soft, and uncertain, as though unsure what hour it was meant to mark. Then everything was still again, but the story was not over, not yet. Somewhere beyond the sealed page, beyond the words and walls, the dream waited bright and deep and endless. And in that dream, Aven began to wake. The book that remembered Aven. Morning came, or something that looked like morning. The light was softer than it should have been, hesitant, as though the sun itself was unsure how to begin again. It crept across the wet cobblestones and climbed the walls of the old sandstone library, touching the ivy leaves until they glowed with dew. The rain had ended hours ago, yet the air still smelled of it, clean, metallic, full of ghosts. For the first time in what felt like forever, the sky held color, a pale gold, thin as breath, spread across the horizon. It was dawn, a real dawn, but it arrived like a memory rediscovered rather than a new beginning. When the librarian unlocked the great wooden doors, the hinges groaned softly, as if the building were waking from a dream. She was an older woman, quiet by habit, with a fondness for silence and dust. Each morning, she followed the same routine: light the front lamps, check the windows, polish the counter, and whisper good morning to the books as though they could hear. But that morning, something was different. The air inside the library was warmer than usual, touched by a faint golden haze. It didn't feel like the cold remnants of lamplight. It felt alive, the way sunlight feels when it's first remembered. She paused at the threshold, her hand resting on the doorframe. "Strange," she murmured to herself. "Someone's been here." The lamps along the reading hall were still lit, their soft glow pooling across the wooden floors. Normally, the night staff would have extinguished them before dawn, except there hadn't been a night staff for years. She walked slowly through the aisles, her steps echoing gently. The books seemed to watch her as she passed. The library always felt alive to her. But this morning it was different, awake in a way that was almost sentient. When she reached the far end of the hall, she saw it. The lamp on the back table still burned, steady and golden. Beside it lay an open book, small, pale blue, untitled. A coat was draped over the chair's back, damp at the edges, as though it had just been left there. The seat itself was empty. The librarian frowned softly. She didn't remember anyone registering a late-night visit, yet the chair was pulled close to the table, and the air above it still felt faintly warm, as if someone had been sitting there only moments ago. She stepped closer. The book's pages glowed faintly in the soft light. On the final page, ink still wet enough to shimmer, a single line was written in delicate golden letters. She read, "Until the sun returned," and the story remembered her name. The librarian stood still, reading the sentence twice, then a third time. It was beautiful, though she didn't know why it made her chest ache the way it did. She touched the edge of the page gently. The ink was warm, not dry, not fresh, but alive. Her eyes moved to the chair again. There was no sign of the reader who had left it behind. No bag, no books, no footsteps on the dusty floor. Only that faint warmth, fading slowly, like the echo of someone's presence. She whispered to herself Aven, though she had no reason to know that name. It simply came to her, like the library itself had spoken it through her lips. Outside, the dawn deepened. Light spilled through the stained glass skylight above, scattering colors across the table, gold, rose, and soft blue. The patterns fell perfectly across the open book, illuminating it as though the world itself had chosen that page to bless. The librarian didn't move for a long while. She simply stood there, watching the light shift. The air around her hummed softly, almost imperceptibly, like a whisper too faint to hear. She could have sworn, just for an instant, that she smelled rain again, and something else beneath it, the scent of old paper and warm ink. Finally, she closed the book gently. As the covers met, the glow within it dimmed to a faint pulse, like the heartbeat of something sleeping. She ran her hand over the smooth blue surface, finding no title, no author, no trace of ownership, only warmth. She carried it carefully to the front desk. For a moment, she considered locking it away in the archives, but something in her resisted. Instead, she placed it on the open display shelf near the entrance, where sunlight would touch it first. The gold lettering of the last line, the one that shouldn't have existed, gleamed faintly even through the closed cover. She read, "Until the sun returned," and the story remembered her name. The librarian smiled faintly. "Then I hope the story was kind to her," she said softly, and turned away. But the library was not empty. Far above, in the vaulted shadows of the ceiling, the air shimmered. For a heartbeat, a faint figure seemed to stand there. Or perhaps it was only the light refracting through glass, a shape made of gold and silver hues, watching quietly, as though listening for a sound no one else could hear. If the librarian had looked up, she might have seen her, a girl sitting cross-legged in air, her hair stirring in a wind that wasn't there, her face peaceful, Her eyes glowed faintly with the same golden light as the ink.Aven. She looked down at the table where she had once read, at the lamp still burning in her absence. She felt no sorrow, no confusion, only a quiet completeness, as though every unanswered question had found its home in silence. She could still hear the whispering of the shelves, but now she understood them. They weren't words at all, but memories, voices of every story that had ever been read, breathing in unison. And she was among them now, a part of their eternal conversation. She reached out, her hand passing through the air like light through glass, and touched the space where her book rested below. The moment her fingers brushed the faint echo of it, the lamp flickered once, and the entire library seemed to inhale. The whispering rose, soft and reverent, like 1,000 pages turning at once. The sunlight poured stronger through the windows. The golden hues deepened until the library itself seemed to shimmer, walls, shelves, and ceilings glowing as though remembering themselves. The building felt whole again. Aven's voice, faint but clear, drifted through the stillness. Every reader leaves a light behind. The librarian, standing at the counter, paused. She thought she'd heard something, a voice, distant and kind. She looked around, but the hall was empty. Still, the air seemed lighter, and the light itself warmer. She smiled without knowing why. Outside, the morning unfolded, the clouds parted, and sunlight touched the world like forgiveness. Birds began to sing, hesitant at first, then brighter, bolder. The world, it seemed, had remembered how to wake, and in the quiet heart of the library, the blue book rested on its shelf. If one looked closely, they might see that its cover still pulsed faintly with light, like breath, sometimes, when the librarian passed by it in the afternoons. She thought she saw a shadow reflected faintly on the glass, the outline of a girl sitting at a table, her head bowed over a book. And sometimes, at twilight, when the lamps were lit and the windows turned to mirrors, the reflection would lift its gaze and smile. The librarian never told anyone about it. She simply let the mystery live, because some stories, she thought, are not meant to end, only to rest, waiting for someone new to open them. And though she never quite understood how or why, she always made sure the lamp beneath the skylight stayed lit through the night, just in case the reader who never woke the dawn decided to return. And now, dear dreamers, as the night continues its gentle hush, let your eyes close and your mind wander softly into dreams. Remember the quiet library, the stories that linger, and let the calm of night guide you into peaceful rest. Good night.